International Trade. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order November 25th, 2021. Per the Director of the Board of Internal Economy on March 10, 2022, all those attending the meeting in person must wear a mask except for members who are at their place during proceedings. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of the witness and members. Please wait till I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those participating via Zoom, you have interpretation options at the bottom of your screen of either floor, English, or French, and all questions have to be directed through the chair. Apologies to our witnesses. As you know, quite often on Mondays and Wednesdays, the House has votes, which delays us getting our meeting underway. So apologies for that, and thank you all for being here. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, March 21st, 2022, the committee is resuming a study on trade opportunities for Canadian businesses in the Indo-Pacific. And we have with us by video conference today the Business Council of Canada, Trevor Kennedy, Vice President, Trade and International Policy, Canadian Labour Congress, Lily Chang, Secretary Treasurer, and Elizabeth Kwan, Senior Researcher, and Da Vinci Cycles, Maud Gauthier, Strategic Initiatives Director, and Neo Bay Metals, J.S. David, Chief Executive Officer and President. Welcome to you all. We will start with opening remarks and then proceed with rounds of questions. Mr. Kennedy, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for the invitation to take part in this meeting on trade opportunities in the Indo-Pacific. Canada is an Indo-Pacific nation by virtue of its geography, history, and strong people-to-people ties, as well as business and trade ties. We must recognize that the Indo-Pacific region is critical to Canada's future economic growth, its economic security, and its role as an advanced nation that is home to a range of leading international firms. Given how important trade is, we're pleased that the committee has undertaken this study on the Indo-Pacific region. So first, focusing on growth. Most of the world's economic growth over the next several decades is projected to take place within the Indo-Pacific. The McKinsey Global Institute estimates that by 2040, Asia will account for 50% of the global economy and become home to most of the world's leading, middle-class consumers. Canada and Canadian companies cannot risk missing out on this enormous growth opportunity. On the issue of diversification, economic resiliency is a growing concern around the world. In some countries, this has given rise to calls for protectionism and nearshoring or onshoring. For a trading nation such as Canada, resiliency means something else entirely. Other than in a few critical areas, self-reliance is not a viable strategy for Canada. Our country must become more and not less globally engaged with like-minded and fast-growing partners, including in the Indo-Pacific. And on the issue of relevancy, Canadian companies have a successful track record beyond our borders, especially in the United States. The United States will undoubtedly remain an attractive place to invest, but like Canada, its share of the global economy could shrink over the coming decades. It's worth questioning, therefore, whether continued success in America will be sufficient to be considered a global leader in the 21st century. Canada and Canadian companies must work harder to establish a meaningful presence where growth is occurring, principally in the Indo-Pacific. So one way Canada can advance its regional interests is to release an Indo-Pacific strategy, and this should include significant focus on trade and economic ties. And within that strategy, we believe trade negotiations can play an important role in building a bridge between Canada and Indo-Pacific markets. First, on the CPTPP, this has been a beneficial agreement for Canadian exporters, and we believe it can deliver even more opportunities through its expansion. We support ongoing accession talks to bring the UK into the framework and support the additional accession for any economy that can meet its high standards. And considering potential value of new applicants, we see South Korea as a particularly important addition, and we expect their application is imminent. On ASEAN, our 2017 report, the ASEAN Advantage, which we developed in partnership with the Canada-ASEAN Business Council and the Asia-Pacific Foundation, modeling showed that a deal would result in significant trade growth and position Canadian firms to compete in this lucrative market of now nearly 700 million people. We welcome progress toward this goal. As far as the Canada-Indonesia CIPA, Indonesia will be one of the largest economies and most populous countries within a few decades. However, for now, it's an underdeveloped relationship. Just last week, we had the opportunity to meet with representatives from the Indonesian business community, Kadin, and I can say that both business communities were optimistic about the opportunities and believe a bilateral deal can enhance our growing relationship. Now to discuss India, the CIPA and the Early Progress Trade Agreement. With growth exceeding 8% this year, India is projected to be one of the fastest growing economies in the world. While it's been a challenge to advance trade talks in the past, India has recently shown openness toward a different approach in pursuing trade deals with advanced economies, including Australia, the UK, and the EU. And to ensure Canada has an advantage in the market, we welcomed the agreement to relaunch CIPA talks and consider an early progress trade agreement to unlock opportunities in the near term. And looking to other frameworks, Canada should closely monitor and assess if its participation in other frameworks could be beneficial, including the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. And Canada should also closely follow the forthcoming U.S. Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. We understand this initial framework will not include Canada or Mexico, both of which are Pacific nations and were part of the original TPP with the United States, as well as now members of USMCA. There could be a risk for Canada to remain on the sidelines of this potentially important regional economic framework, which will include our key partners in the region, and including many CPTPP countries and our most important trade partner, the United States. So just to conclude, the Business Council of Canada supports a comprehensive economic strategy with an ambitious trade agenda. It's critical that our country moves quickly and in partnership with industry and other stakeholders to ensure we don't miss out on opportunities. And thank you, and look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. Ms. Chang.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Lily Chang. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer for the Canadian Labour Congress. And I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples known as Toronto. My pronouns are she and her. The Canadian Labour Congress advocates on national issues on behalf of 3 million working people. We speak on behalf of workers in all sectors of the economy across Canada. These workers contribute directly to trade, from production to manufacturing to transportation, as well as at ports that ship and receive goods. Given that trade negotiations in the Indo-Pacific region only just recently started, my comments today will be general and will highlight Labour's priorities for trade in the region. But first, let me quickly lay out some thoughts on the context of the trade negotiations for the region. Globalization based on economic efficiencies has clearly made countries vulnerable and less resilient to major disruptions, such as a pandemic, the war in the Ukraine, and the zero COVID lockdowns in China. The ongoing and cumulative effects of these global events have been profound. There have been disruptions of the global economy and global supply chains, increased isolationism, setbacks in labor standards resulting in immense human suffering, breakdowns in social cohesion, and growing inequality, especially for the most marginalized and vulnerable in our societies. So it is even more important now to have effective mechanisms in trade agreements and trade policy to enforce sustainable development commitments, to uphold and promote strong labor, social, and environmental standards and production. We need resilient and sustainable social, economic, and cultural systems that foster social cohesion and collective prosperity through a human-centered recovery in line with the ILO Global Call to Action. Canada's trade agreements must be coherent with domestic policy priorities and at a minimum contain a strong enforceable labor chapter that includes but is not limited to the protection of the fundamental principles and rights at work in the ILO Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work 1998, as well as the 8 fundamental ILO conventions that include Freedom of Association and Protection of the Right to Organize Convention, Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention, Forced Labor Convention and its Protocol, Abolition of Forced Labor Convention, Minimum Age Convention, Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention, Equal Remuneration Convention, and Discrimination, Employment and Occupation Convention. Next month, the ILC will discuss adding occupational health and safety to those fundamental principles and rights at work. This must also be central to Canada's trade priorities, combating forced and compulsory labor and child labor in the supply chains, addressing violence against workers, exercising their labor rights, including single instances of violence or threats, ensuring that migrant workers are protected under labor laws, non-discrimination in employment on the basis of sex, including sexual harassment, pregnancy, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender-based wage discrimination, and ensuring decent conditions of work with respect to minimum wages, hours of work, and occupational health and safety. The CLC also supports other domestic policy priorities in trade negotiations, including strong environment and equity commitments. We were heartened to see that the trade objectives for Indonesia and ASEAN included comprehensive and enforceable labor commitments, comprehensive and enforceable environment commitments, dedicated provisions on trade and gender, and dedicated provisions on trade and Indigenous peoples. Trade agreements have real impact and consequences for workers, their families, and their communities. Workers must not be displaced from their jobs from increased labor mobility and outsourcing. Local food security and production, as well as local industries, must not be undermined, and workers' rights, including migrant workers' rights, must be protected. Fundamental human and labor rights, equity, and environmental protection must be integral in trade negotiations. Canada must model internationally fair and human-centered trade agreements that are strong, comprehensive, and enforceable for our common prosperity. Thank you for this opportunity to present workers' views today, and we look forward to questions from the members.
Thank you very much, Ms. Chang. On to Ms. Gauthier for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for giving us the chance to speak on this committee. I'm here today to present a situation that we think is unfair regarding customs tariffs in Canada. So to give a bit of our background, we are Da Vinci Cycles, a proud Canadian bicycle manufacturer. In fact, I'm pretty sure we are one of the last big manufacturer in North America in terms of units made every year. We make over 20,000 bicycles per year here in Saguenay, Quebec. The biggest growth opportunity in our industry is the electrification of the bicycles. To give you an idea, it's actually around 10 to 15% of our sales this year, but in 2 or 3 years, it will represent around 40 to 50% of our sales. This trend is clearly visible in Europe. For your information, a company who buys a complete bicycle made in a foreign country will pay import duties of about 13%, as planned in the Canadian harmonized system, which is the business model most of our competitors uses, and that we use as well for entry-level bicycles in order to stay competitive. But we do more than that. We import bicycles that are made and assembled. We import bicycle parts and components that are used to make bicycle, and like the brakes, the wheels, the carbon frames, and we will pay the duty on every single component according to the CBSA regulation. And we will assemble these bicycles here in Quebec. We even go further. We buy aluminum extrusions from local providers in Canada, or import some more complex hydroform extrusions, and we will make the bicycles from these raw tubes to an aluminum frame and then assemble it. If you've ever ridden a Bixi in Montreal, you had a ride on a product that is 100% made in Quebec. Until now, all is good and fair, but when we are making electric bicycles, the game changes. The company I spoke about that only import full bicycles from overseas beneficiate of the preferential tariff of 0% as stated in the harmonized system. Because of the constructions, on our side, we will pay the duties on every single components that we import. But because of some sentence constructions, we will also pay duties on the second most expensive part of our bicycle. We will pay tariff on it, which is the battery. For every other person, company importing bicycles is duty free. But for us, as we want to promote quality jobs in our area, and that is an important mission for us, we have to pay the duty on those battery, which are beneficiating the preferential tariff as full bicycles. And this situation is upon us because we have many. Our main battery provider is Shimano, which is a company based in Japan, but they do make their bicycle batteries in those countries we are talking about today, so in Southern Asia. But because we cannot have a certificate of origin, we cannot beneficiate from the preferential tariff, and that directly impacts us. And we think that this kind of gray area between the preferential, the HS code, and the origin of certification of origin is impacting us. And I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gauthier. On to Mr. David, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Jean-Sébastien David, and I'm the president of Niobe Metals. It's a mining company that is traded in Toronto, but their headquarters is in Montreal. So we're recognized as a mining company that works with 2 critical and strategic metals, and talking about niobium and tantalum. We have 2 mining properties in Ontario, in the lowlands of James Bay, and we have the Crevier project in particular in Quebec that has 2 metals. It has both metals, niobium and tantalum, in the mine. So this project was launched some years ago, and I'm here to tell you that this project will see the light of day because of the evolution of batteries. So the advances that Toshiba and Ekion have made over the last few years mean that we have spent some years dealing with a project that had been dormant, and we're hoping to mine 125 tons of tantalum oxide over the few years, as well as niobium. So just to say that in the Philippines, which is therefore part of your group, are people who are very interested in tantalum. And one of the members that's not on your list is South Korea. So South Korea is a consumer of niobium and has been for quite a few years in their steel-making production. And we can see the importance that South Korea represents in your list. Niobium is quite a rare element. There are only 3 mine sites producing niobium on the planet, and 2 of them are in Brazil. One is in Canada, and one of the Brazilian entities is 100% owned by China. And the CBMM has 25% of the shares. 25% of the shares of that company are held by China. So having a purely Canadian product is something that's very sensible. There have been a lot of developments in terms of niobium batteries, particularly in terms of the recharging capacity, the number of cycles that the battery can endure. And it can also better operate in very low temperatures. So given that these batteries have been on the market for maybe 3 years approximately, the anode battery that's made primarily with niobium, but now we're also seeing a cathode battery. In terms of tantalum, as I mentioned, the Philippines would be of interest, but we understand that the main production... Mr.
Interrupting. Our translators are having some difficulties. Could you adjust your microphone? Please go ahead, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Est-ce que c'est bien? Is it better?
Mr. David,
Mr. David, I think that perhaps the microphone is not selected. Could you look at where the icon is for the microphone to see if it's properly selected on your computer? Everything looks like that.
Est-ce que vous entendez mieux?
Can you hear me any better? Would it be possible, Mr. David, to unplug the headset and plug it back in again? Can you hear me better? It was working earlier. Can you hear me? Is that good now? I'm sorry, Mr. David. Well, when we did the sound test earlier, it was working perfectly well, so I don't know what happened in between.
Again with your time, please.
Okay, so again, I'm representing Niobe Metal, which is based in Montreal. We're playing with two special metals, which is niobium and tantalum. So those are critical metals for our economy. We call it green metal. Reason for that, for niobium especially, niobium it's an alloy with steel, so it allowed the steel to be a lot more flexible. It can with having niobium inside your steel will allow you to have more capacity when you have a different temperature. So that's why new construction, new buildings, new skyscrapers, new bridges, other than pipelines, they're using steel doped by niobium. So we do have a few projects in Ontario and mainly one in Quebec. The one was discovered in 1974 in Quebec, and
Madame la
has
Présidente,
two critical.
Madame la Présidente, l'interprète nous.
Madam Chair, it has not been solved. It has just been flipped now the other way around. So the interpreter working into French is having the same problem.
Je peux pas faire grand-chose d'autre. Tout à l'heure, ça.
Look, I can't do anything more. I was told that it worked, so I don't know what to say. I didn't change anything.
Just
Yeah, I didn't change anything.
Sometimes there's ghosts in the room to create things, but we have to ensure
well-
that we have accurate translation for all of the members.
I understand that. Je comprends très bien.
I understand very well.
We will suspend for a minute while the technician tries to sort this out. to order. We are going to, okay, hold on, guys. We're losing so much time here. Hold on. We're going to suggest we start with the questions from the members. And when Mr. David's connection problems have been resolved, possibly we can go back to him and give him back a couple of minutes to get him on the record. So we will go to Mr. Martel for 6 minutes, please.
D'abord, merci.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for being with us today, first of all. My first question will be to Ms. Gauthier. First of all, welcome.
What's going on?
Are votes not being called?
We can continue for, I can't hear you, hon. We can continue for
20 minutes.
We can continue for 20 minutes if everybody is in agreement. Thank you, Mr. Massey. Is everybody in agreement that we continue for 20 minutes and then we can vote from our app here in committee or wherever you're stationed so we don't lose too much time? Everybody's fine with that? And the clerk will keep track of the time for us? Okay. Thanks for raising that, Mr. Massey. Okay, Mr. Martel, back to you.
Bon, alors, bien sûr que
So, of course, my question is for Ms. Gauthier. First of all, welcome to the committee. I was very happy to have you here today, and also for you to highlight a manufacturing company at home. So tell me, how much is Da Vinci exporting into the Indo-Pacific region currently? Well, currently, our relationship with the Indo-Pacific region are really suppliers to us, and they have been so for over 30 years. The bicycle industry is very specialized, and it's a market that developed, but now the suppliers have become highly specialized, and so we have that relationship with them. We don't necessarily send any bicycles there, but we have many suppliers that we deal with in the region. Well, Ms. Gauthier, can you tell us what the main regions that you do business with are? Yes, Vietnam, Thailand, Taiwan, rather, are the main ones. And the smaller ones, Myanmar, that surrounding countries, Cambodia, for example. In your opinion, how could the government facilitate exports? You mean exports of, or the imports, rather, of parts to Canada? Yes. Well, currently, I believe, and I think the major point would be really an analysis of the tariff rules that are under the harmonized system, because right now we're subject to a law that was drafted several decades ago and hasn't necessarily been updated. So for us, it causes problems, particularly in terms of HS codes and the electrification of bikes. And so this is really a direction that would help us in the future, because this bill is really one of the past. It needs to be revised. So my next question is for Mr. David. First of all, thank you. Happy to see you again. You have a promotional project that will be necessary for building batteries. That's very promising. So if you look at the analysis, would most of your metals be Canadian? Would there would be more opportunity for exports to Asia? Thank you for the question. There would effectively be a lot of opportunities on the Asian side, and as I tried to explain to you earlier, already the Philippines would be a country that would be a great customer for the tantalum side. India is of critical importance, in our opinion, in terms of niobium. And one member that's not on your list that I mentioned is South Korea. South Korea, we've already had contact with them, and they would be ready to buy Canadian niobium. I understand presently that it's difficult to revise your projects, but how do you explain that the government invests so much in batteries and that we're unable to really exploit all of these minerals in Canada for the creation of these batteries? Look, in terms of exploration, it's something that is feasible and something that is achievable. In terms of critical and strategic minerals, even though there's brass and nickel, it's a no-brainer with them, those minerals. It's not complicated to produce, to find it, and second, to produce it. But for critical and strategic metals like niobium, like lithium, the difficulty is in terms of the metallurgy involved. So when you extract these metals, then you have to create the oxide for several of these critical and strategic metals. So the problem is finding an economical recipe to manage this. And I would say that there's not necessarily an issue of effort. There's a lot of money that's been spent on it globally. There's help for the mining. But where there's no assistance for us at all is in terms of that part where we can refine it. There's nothing there. It's a no man's land. So I've been working on this for 12 years. I've been talking to the Quebec government to try and get some help for that part of it, and I think the Canadian government could do much more. You announced a few weeks ago that there was some assistance coming for exploration, but that remains for that part of the sector. It's not in terms of the design and where we're really creating the precursors that the battery suppliers need. So in that department, we need to go get hard cash from the markets. Yes, thank you. My next question is from Ms. Gauthier. You were talking about issues related to tariffs on batteries that make your bicycles not uncompetitive. I'd like to know if you have received any assistance from the Trade Commissioner Service or from any other government institutions. No. In fact, we tried to do work with the MEQ and then with EDC, but we didn't really have the power to change anything. So what's happening is that we're always running up against the CBSA, and they refer us to this law, as I said, that hasn't been updated for quite some time. So we don't have any assistance, and the message is
try to get as much information as we can. Yes, Mr. Varani, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Can everyone hear me okay? The audio is okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, it is.
Okay, perfect. So there's a number of things I wanted to cover, but I guess I want to start with Monsieur David. Donc, j'étais très content de vous écouter.
I was very pleased to hear you, and I'm sorry for the technical problems. But in terms of the critical minerals, you mentioned indeed that there's niobium. It, in particular, gives us an opportunity to have a longer charging time, and also that batteries with that kind of critical mineral, or metal rather, couldn't have a longer lifespan in lower temperatures. Did I understand that correctly? That's exactly right, yes. It is the advances made by Toshiba. It's not science fiction. They already make 3 kinds of niobium batteries, and they have those already on the market. And the reason why they're really taking over this market, that's maybe a niche market, but it's really the fact that it's the rapidity of the charging capacity.
Use it even if it's minus 30. And également au niveau.
And also, in terms of the number of cycles, ICAM is now working with Amazon currently now for the robots that they have within their warehouses, that they have to keep charging rapidly and often. And so their niobium batteries they're using for that.
You know that you mentioned some of the investments we've announced in the last few weeks. Even today, the Prime Minister and Minister Champagne were announcing a venture with Stellantis of $3.6 billion for more production of zero-emitting vehicles here in Canada, which is undoubtedly a good sign for the environment, a good sign for the Canadian economy. But in terms of what you were saying to Mr. Martel, is that you see that we need to both be involved in the end production of the cars, about the exploration of the minerals, but also in the refinement of the minerals. So would you identify, are there other nations that are leading the charge in terms of investing in the refinement of the minerals that you would identify as a best practice? Like, can you give us some input on that front?
Yeah. First of all, we actually, I have people working on that. So they're doing they're doing some samples for those guys, for Toshiba and Aeon. And what we're trying to do, it's try to perform and to produce the oxide greenest way. So it took us we've been working on that for the last year and a half, and that's, you know, that's our money. We were not able to get anything from anybody. So and that's fine. But I will say my competitor elsewhere in the States, they're getting some subsidy or some help, some program. So I wish to apply for some of those new program. I know Mr. Ford has made some announcements. So, but again, I think we have, and Quebec and Ontario and everybody has put a lot of money at the beginning and at the end, but in the middle there was nothing. So on the raffinery side, when the smelting and trying to find the best way to do it, and there was no money. And
Mr.
again,
David, can I ask you something very specific? There's about, I think, around 30 critical minerals. You were talking about 2 of them. Do all 30 of the critical minerals require the investments in the refinement that you're talking about? Or is it only tantalum and niobium that require this refining?
Big time. Lithium is a very good example as well. So you need to spend a lot of time to find the right recipe, because, you know, every rock is different. You know, the people thinking that, okay, it's lithium, it's easy, you know the recipe. Usually you cannot apply. You can take, let's say, the main recipe to produce it, but you need to adapt it. And every rock is different. And that's why it's so complicated to try to find the right recipe. And that's why you need to spend time and money on that.
Okay, thank you. If I could just ask some questions in my remaining time to Ms. Kwan. Thank you for your input from the Canadian Labour Congress. The former head of the Canadian Labour Congress is my constituent, Mr. Youssef, who's now a senator, but it's great to have you here. You mentioned your gratitude for the strong environmental, labor, trade and gender, and trade and Indigenous rights chapters, enforceable chapters, in terms of what we have put on the table in terms of our approach to negotiating with Indonesia. And that obviously is a springboard off of what we did successfully with CUSMA. But can you identify any potential areas that you would see as challenges on labor, on the environment, on trade and gender, and on trade and Indigenous with respect to the various members of ASEAN? There are a number of nations among the ASEAN group. Do you see any obstacles or hurdles that we should be aware of as we embark upon that kind of approach with all of the members of the ASEAN group? So over to you, Ms. Cheng.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask our senior researcher, Elizabeth Kwan, to address your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Mr. Varani. Yes, there are some issues. We've had a first round debrief from the government on the negotiations with Indonesia, and the short and long of it is that the template of what we want in comprehensive trade agreements is very much North American / EU, I guess, centric, and that many of the countries in the Indo-Pacific region actually do not negotiate strong labor environment or inclusive trade chapters. So that is sort of basically the short answer to that question. And it's not just Indonesia, it will be a lot of the other countries as well.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Savard-Tremblay for 6 minutes.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and hello to all my colleagues and to the witnesses as well. Thank you for your testimony. That will no doubt help us looking at these possibilities. My question will be for Ms. Kwan and Ms. Chang from the Canadian Labour Congress. According to some experts, some people say that the work of children is on the rise in Malaysia and Indonesia, so two countries that are part of the region we're talking about since the beginning of this crisis. Do you share that analysis? And if so, what do you see as the consequences of an eventual deal with them or agreement with them?
Yes, certainly. A number of the countries in this region are of concern to us. There are all kinds of rights, workers' rights that are not adhered to, and certainly the conventions of the ILO are not also respected as well. So I will turn it to Elizabeth, who can probably provide some more details.
Sure. I thank you for your question. And I think that one of the things that we have to recall is the recent cancellation of PPE from Malaysia that Canada initiated due to severe concerns of the use of forced labor. There's also child labor involved in many sort of agricultural endeavors. There is, although it's always a to and fro, but for instance, there is often discussions of how seed production is using a lot of child labor to produce seeds that actually get commissioned by headquarters or companies in Europe or in North America by big seed companies. That's an example. So there is a good number of children who do perform a lot of labor that would be unacceptable to us in Canada. Thank you.
Quels sont les secteurs
What are the sectors that are most affected by this double scourge, so both forced labor and child labor?
I would say that the sectors involved would be numerous. It really depends on the country, and you're talking about a whole region. But I would say that in agriculture and textiles and in mining, there's all sorts of sectors that would have either forced labor or child labor involved. Of course, not every company, but definitely a lot more, let's say, prevalent than in Canada. And I think that these actually concerns of in these sectors for forced labor and child labor is represented by the commissioner that we have, who's the commissioner who looks at these critical areas of and sectors in trade.
Selon certaines enquêtes,
according to some studies, we should even be very suspicious of equitable labels, and so even there could be some child labor or forced labor involved. So do you also share that concern?
Lily, do you want to? No? Okay. Yes, we do. We do, and the same actually would apply for not just child labor and forced labor, but also that for greenwashing of environmental labels as well. So it's sort of supply chains are very complex and deep, and so to actually be able to verify that there is no child and forced labor or greenwashing of environmental labeling is doable, but very difficult. But it is something that Canada pursues as a policy.
Et
And in terms of the operability of this, in terms of negotiations of trade agreements, what could be done? How could we impose requirements and have adequate verifications and surveillance of this to ensure that we're dealing with businesses that are not doing greenwashing, as you're talking about, or that might use children for forced labor?
Well, I certainly think that the first thing to do is when we're negotiating those agreements that we include in them that there's that they are required to abide by the ILO conventions, and then of course there needs to be monitoring of. So, what's in writing is not always what actually happens on the ground. So, but to start off with, we need to start off with the words actually in the contracts.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Massey for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses. Maybe Ms. Chang, I can follow up on that. So you're asking for specifically similar to what we have in the new Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement or USMCA, NAFTA 2.0, whatever you want to call it, is actually to be written into the agreement. One of the problems we've had in the past is that when you've had environment, labor, outside the agreement, there are separate chapters that aren't enforceable. So is that what you're asking for, is to be written into the context of the agreement so it's not like a satellite orbiting around that's independent and unenforceable?
Absolutely. If we think these things are important and important to Canadian workers and important to the workers in the countries that we are contracting with. So we want it part of the main agreement and so that they're enforceable as well. So,
and we've focused on the environment and labor, and part of labor has also been child labor. Do you know if there's been any thought or there's been any consideration of having a separate chapter on child labor? I mean, that's one of the things that I think that sometimes gets overlooked at times. I'm just wondering whether at this point in time, especially with some of the countries we're dealing with here, whether having a separate agreement on child labor might bring more attention. I just throw that out there as a possibility.
Well, if it's something that we are concerned about and think that it might have, that there might be stronger to have a separate chapter on child labor, then I think that that's a good idea to do that. Definitely, whatever protections we can put in place as we want to have these agreements with these with the Indo-Pacific countries. I think whatever is strongest in terms of making sure that workers there are protected. I think that would be a good idea.
Okay. And if I can follow up as well, and perhaps, I don't know, Ms. Kwan or Ms. Chang, one of you two of you, with regards to an issue I've raised, even within our own departments, didn't really have a good answer, in my opinion, for it, is about the sale in the agreements related to arms manufacturing. Some of these countries have some issues with regards to their civilian populations and also the use. And I don't like where some of Canada's small arms and actually larger arms have actually gone. And I'm wondering whether there's been any thought with regards to that. And I've been trying to determine where in the process to flag this as we go down this road as an issue. It doesn't appear to be one that comes up independently. Do you know if any thought's been given to that? I'm really interested in that.
Elizabeth, do you want to go ahead with that?
Sure. Thank you for your question. I would say specifically, as far as I know, and I don't believe that any of our trade agreements actually kind of have that specific mention of arms or arms production. I do know that if I could say that sometimes, not arms production necessarily, and I'm I'm adding a little bit here, that sometimes the production of goods get, how shall I say, they get laundered, right? They, the country that has, high emissions or poor labor standards would then, kind of, kind of export to another country that is acceptable under our rules, our trade agreements, and that sort of thing. So again, it is something that I think that Canada is very serious about in all those respects. And I think that whether it's arms or whether it's production of other things, that we have to be very diligent in terms of strong trade agreements, and we have to be able to follow up, monitor, and actually enforce when we see that something is not in compliance.
Great. And real quickly to Mr. David, with regards to, I was actually at the Stellantis announcement today. Very good announcement. We've been after this for a while, and so it's really, really positive. Real quickly, at the end of it, we haven't talked much about battery recycling. And I think that's one of the things that there's an opportunity. Have you been involved in any of that, and any suggestions about how we could actually advance on battery recycling? That seems to be something that is missing from the equation of the whole plan right now.
And I can tell you, sir, that that has to be part of the equation. In my presentation, I have the full cycle from exploration to recycling. So, for now, for us, the thing we know is to do the exploration, to produce the oxide, and to produce the precursor for the battery people. So this is our field of expertise, but no doubt we need the full cycle here in Canada. So
I'd hate for us to become like we have been doing over plastics, exporting that to the Philippines and other places because of lax following of even treaties that we've signed. And I don't want to be a producer of batteries and then dumping them into third world countries again. We got to get in front of this, not trying to play catch up.
Fully agree.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. We have 2 minutes till the start of the vote. I'm asking for some direction from the committee. Do you want to suspend? We can all vote here with the vote app and then resume our meeting, or we can adjourn. What is the desire of the committee? Well, we're certainly going to vote, and then do you want to continue on with our meeting after the vote? We'll do the vote right here. Mr. Martel?
What's to go?
You want to adjourn after? I'm sorry.
We have to come back.
Okay, so I'll suspend the
wanna come
meeting
back?
and I'll resume the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Everybody's okay with that? Mr. Savard-Tremblay?
Moi, je suis d'accord. Je pense.
Yes, I agree. I think that if there's more than a half an hour left after, it's worth staying.
So I'll suspend the meeting and we will resume after the vote. And everybody's in agreement. We can, if we all want to vote right from here or wherever you are, as soon as everyone has voted, we don't have to wait the 10 minutes. We can resume as long as all of our members have been able to vote without any problem.
I'm okay with that, Chair.
Oh, I got
Mr.
it.
Massey and Minister.
has resumed. On to Mr. Martel. Oh, wait, okay.
Wait.
So we're waiting for Mr. Massey for one moment. There you are. Okay, Mr. Martel, 5 minutes, please.
Let's see, wait.
Thank you. So, Mr. David, I think that we must secure the supply in Canada and not have to rely on Chinese or Russian suppliers. So I'd like to hear what you think about the competitiveness of Canadian mines. I think you're on mute.
Excuse, là, Sébastien. Oui. J'entends pas.
I can't hear anything.
J'entends pas.
I can't hear anything. Jean-Sébastien?
Nobody. Hein?
Est-ce que ça fonctionne?
Oui.
Now is it working? Okay. So, competitiveness. Yeah, I understand. Just to give you an example, niobium oxide is currently bought from Brazil by the Chinese. So one of the mines is 100% Chinese owned. And they're going to buy this, they're going to convert it and make several niobium products in China. And after that, it comes back over to North American markets. What we want to offer, it's another option that's a fully North American one. And that's why we exist, I could say. And on the Canadian side, I think that with our environmental standards, I've always been very proud of working here in Canada because our methods, the way in which we produce and exploit these minerals is much better than many countries on the planet. And I think that we have to be proud of that. And it's really a trademark for us. It's really a trademark, yes, that we really need to focus on that and highlight that. And I think for tantalum already, that's going to be the first product that we can sell because of its Canadian connotation and the fact that it's extracted in a very different way from what's happening in Rwanda or in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So we have a great advantage in ensuring that it's manufactured here and the way in which we do it. If Canada could achieve or see these projects through more quickly, what would be that impact on a trade deal with the Indo-Pacific region, in your opinion? Well, I would say just quickly, as I was saying to you earlier, South Korea has already sought us out, and there's a strong interest in niobium produced here in Canada on their part. For tantalum, I talked to you about the Philippines. They're very interested in getting different products that might be manufactured here. And you can't forget that we have ways we have savoir-faire. We know how to do things here. And I think that we need to put that in the balance as well. In terms of the slowness of whether it's us or someone else, it's always a great challenge. I mean, we're talking about 10 years for the latest discovery, and now we're already looking further down the road to 15 years. And I've seen this throughout my entire career. Then I've seen the number of years required for an operation to be seen through increase over time from discovery. And already making a discovery is something exceptional, but to get it to the operational level, and that's a really huge challenge. And so you have to work very hard at it, I can tell you that.
You have 9 seconds left. You can't squeeze that one in. Mr. Mio.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the witness attending today's session. I'd like to direct the following question through the chair to Mr. Kennedy. Considering a large percentage of Canadians' economy is comprised of SME currently, are Canadian small and medium-sized enterprise competitive in the ASEAN region? And to what degree would a signed free trade agreement improve Canadian industry ability to compete?
Well, thank you for your question. And although our members largely represent larger firms, we're big supporters of obviously Canada's SME economy. We work hand in hand, and many of the suppliers of our member companies are SMEs. And one of the things that we support, I know it's a priority of the government, is finding ways to enhance opportunities for SMEs. Trade agreements do provide an opportunity, a bridge. This is where they can lean on the Trade Commissioner Service. They have a lot of resources available, other tools to help navigate some of these markets and opportunities. But generally speaking, there's a lot of opportunity for firms of different sizes with different markets in the Indo-Pacific.
And to follow with that question, how can Canada navigate the investment protectionist challenges in the Indo-Pacific region?
So I think that it really depends on the agreement. We know that in the CPTPP we do have investor protection. We may see that in other agreements as well. It really depends on the partner in the context of working with India, whether that's a separate agreement through a FIPA. But to say that we are major investors in the region, varying levels of investment, and Canadian investors do benefit from those types of protections. And using the new model that Canada's developed, I understand there's been quite a development in the way we do approach our investor protections to take into account concerns of the past, and that certainly seems acceptable in the wide range of agreements, but it really does depend on the partner and the country. I just one point I'd raise too in discussion about the Indo-Pacific. When we're discussing a region as a whole, we're dealing with a lot of different countries at different levels of development and different trade profiles, so it can be difficult to generalize at times. But as a whole, we do see a lot of opportunity, and it's worth noting that there are different markets with different opportunities for Canada.
Your comments. So can you share a little bit more from the perspective of Canadian firms? What should be the priorities in the trade agreement with ASEAN regions or with other regions like the South Korea or Taiwan?
Well, I'll start maybe with South Korea first, because it's a country that we've been focused more on recently, working with our partners in Korea, the Federation of Korean Industries, and the Business Council will be releasing a report soon, which highlights some of the mutual opportunities we see between Canadian and Korean industry. It's a really unique relationship where, rather than a case of us import or exporting, we're looking at partnerships between our industries. And there's a great opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity in Japan, very similar. But looking at ASEAN, or India for that matter, we're looking at how can Canada compete with some of our peers in the world. Australia is very aggressive. The UK is very aggressive. The EU is very aggressive. And we do need to look at what they've been able to accomplish in their trade agreements to apply some of the standards that we've updated to our more modern trade negotiations. But ultimately, to ensure that Canada has the footing it needs to compete. And we need to be cognizant that there are other countries that are competing for those markets, and we want to make sure that Canada is the best place to export from to that region.
Now, and how would a trade agreement like this will benefit Canadian firm and worker, particular sectors and province that expect to any particular sectors or province that will expect to benefit from this trade agreement?
Well, looking at Canada's traditional trade flows, we do have a lot of agricultural exports, and certainly, workers in those sectors have benefited. Industries in those sectors have benefited. Canadian natural resources as well. We've seen a lot of interest in Canadian manufactured products, in addition to that, we have a lot of services that Canada exports to the world. And as a whole, the data generally shows that trade has been good for Canadians. Growing the trade exposed industries generally have higher incomes, and there are a lot of opportunities for trade for Canadian workers. And just to touch upon some of the points that have been raised before about labor standards, we have been able to put in some high labor standards in modern trade agreements, including in the Indo-Pacific CPTPP, including some important additions to that agreement, and certainly the USMCA, we may be able to apply some of that to our trade agreements in the region, subject to certain partners, and certainly that can help to protect and lift standards for workers in the part of the world.
On to Mr. Savard Tremblay for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci. Alors,
thank you. So my question, I just want to make sure I have the right name. Ms. Gauthier for Da Vinci Cycles. We know, well, we obviously know that you are promoting a green mode of transportation, but the countries in ASEAN area, Indo-Pacific area, have worked hard on green transportation, and we know that there would potentially be some opportunities for you in that market. Do you position your products as being potentially one for them for a low carbon economy? Well, we are working with a PBSC company, and our bikes are definitely, in fact, certainly they square with those values, and we have 100,000 bicycles in the city to try and reduce the number of cars. And for those 100,000 bikes, we asked, I think it was over 10 years ago, and we didn't get any bikes that came back under the guarantee. So we can see that they're a good product. And so we have expertise in this area with PBSC for over 12 years now. And you were talking a bit about difficulties earlier. I'm glad that you did that. It will help us to do our work in line with our study. But do you feel that you have been supported and accompanied here? Were you informed of opportunities and ways that you can develop your markets in that part of the world? Well, in fact, we can develop our market with free service bikes, but really we didn't get any support really from the government. In terms of the battery, for example, the message we're getting is that it's nice that you're building your bikes in Canada, but we're not going to help you with the tariffs on the batteries. So without getting into all the details, that's really the message that we're getting.
For 2.5 minutes,
Merci.
please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Going back to some of the enforcement measures for the agreement, Ms. Kwan or Ms. Chang, do you have any examples of any other, I guess, enforcements that have taken place? That's one of the things that we are going to struggle with, but I'm wondering if any of the current agreements that are in place for oversight of labor, child, and other things have actually had some real marks of success to ensure that when things are agreed upon and then broken later on, if there's been a halting or a suspension of certain trade things to ensure accountability.
Elizabeth, go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you for that question. I would say that our biggest trade partner, the USA, and also the CUSMA, we've seen much of that enforceability at work. In fact, we've seen not only state-to-state dispute settlement, but we've also seen actually a number now of the rapid response labor mechanism come to play. And those are sort of the real examples of what enforceable chapters in trade agreements look like. We don't have enforceability under CITA, for instance. We have very good standards under CITA for labor and for environment and for inclusive trade, but it's not enforceable. So there's really kind of no real sort of how should I say, ability to actually address non-compliance. So in terms of what we're seeking is that, you know, I'd like to just say that there are many things that are different now than they were when, you know, CETA was developed as an agreement. You know, we have so many globally life-changing events that, in fact, what we need to do is we need to have a much more collaborative, a much more, I think, resilient, not just sustainable, but resilient trade agreement between two countries or between Canada and ASEAN, for instance.
I know that I'm running out of time here. So bottom line at the end of the day, it has to be written into the agreement. Otherwise, it's just public shaming at the end of the day, which doesn't go very far.
Correct.
So it's written into the agreement. You just gave a perfect example of what we have new versus what we've had in the past. Thank you very much. I know I'm out of time, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Massey. Mr. Baldonali, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I'd like to go to Mr. Kennedy, and in terms of these negotiations, and he had alluded to it in his testimony about the nuances that are required as part of any different trade negotiation. So in terms of the two negotiations that would be taking place with Indonesia and then the ASEAN countries, what areas would Canada be most sensitive to in terms of the impact that it would have on Canadian companies? Would it be, you know, certain areas, for example, like clothing, textiles? So I'd like to get your opinions on that. And then secondly, excuse me, in the areas where we could most benefit.
So thank you for the question, and they're very important negotiations, which sometimes there is some overlap, and there's also unique elements to them as well. In the case of Indonesia, you know, we were able to launch negotiations, and we certainly support that process initially because we were having difficulty launching our ASEAN talks, but both negotiations have a value, and Indonesia in its own right is a very important country, and we can do things differently as the Australians were able to do with their agreement with ASEAN and with Indonesia. As for sectors, truthfully, I'm not as familiar with some of the sectors that would be affected. We've conducted some economic impact assessments in the past for ASEAN in our report, which now would be dated in 2017. So I do apologize that the data may no longer be up to date. But we did see a lot of opportunity for a lot of our traditional sectors. But as I noted as well, one of the areas that Canada has done really well is in the services sector in Southeast Asia. We have a very strong presence of Canadian firms in the insurance industry, for instance, a long-standing presence and a very successful presence in some of these markets. So that's just something I'd like to point out. And the opportunities are obviously quite broad as well. Looking at digital trade is one area that's growing, and there's another trade agreement that's also in place. It's more of a plurilateral negotiation with the Digital Economy Partnership Agreement based in Singapore as another opportunity to establish some standards for digital trade, somewhere where Canada is well positioned to compete, and there's tremendous opportunity with a quickly emerging digital economy in Southeast Asia. So I guess there are 3 different trade negotiations referenced, but just to say that the Indonesian negotiation is important. It's something we may be able to negotiate in a shorter time frame and more tailor-made for a very important relationship. But we should also be aware of the importance of ASEAN and the interconnected nature of that regional supply chain and the large amount of global interest there is in that supply chain, ensuring that Canada can at least be plugged in to a certain capacity.
And I'd like, if I could, to take that same type of question and ask the representatives from the Canadian Labour Congress, Ms. Kwan and Ms. Chang, again, in terms of these negotiations with these two countries, in specific Indonesia and the ASEAN countries, you know, what areas would Canada be most sensitive to, and in terms of your views and the impact on labour standards, environmental standards, and how that might impact or challenge these discussions?
Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. I would say that in many of these countries, they are still developing, and much of their labor standards are not the same as Canada or the US or the EU. And I mean, that is just the reality. And what we want to do is that we don't want to, how shall I say, we don't want to harm workers, whether it's Canadian workers or whether it's workers in those countries. And I would say that we also have to respect that, there's a lot that happens in Indonesia and ASEAN and India and South Korea and Taiwan that we're not as aware of because we don't consume the news as much as we would, in the North American or the EU sort of news cycle. But there's a lot that goes on, and it's very different because ASEAN is 10 countries, Indonesia is one of them, right? So CPTPP has 4 of those countries from ASEAN, and then our CEP has 15 of the countries, of which there's another subgroup. So there is a lot of complexity to it, but we should never, I don't think, forego a lower labor standards for Canadians going into these trade agreements. I think that, what are we trading for if not for the mutual prosperity of peoples from both those trading partners?
Thank you very much. I'm sorry you're like 20 seconds over time. Ms. Dillon, please, will be our final speaker.
For Monsieur Kennedy.
My question is for Mr. Kennedy, the member of the Canadian business heads of businesses talking about free trade with Indonesia and ASEAN. And how would you sum up the investment climate as it currently stands?
So the investment climate in Southeast Asia, I understand, is quite attractive. I know many large Canadian institutional investors have found a lot of opportunities there, not exclusively in Southeast Asia. And once again, the individual countries within ASEAN, there's quite a range. We're also seeing a lot of businesses find a lot of interest in Singapore as one key hub for global growth. It's becoming a real magnet for investment and trade within the region. So broadly speaking, a lot of opportunity. There's some variation if you look at certain ASEAN economies, but just overall, and in Indonesia, just because I had a chance to interact with the business community last week, say there's a lot of mutual interest, both from the Indonesian standpoint and the Canadian standpoint, in investing and trading between our two countries. So a very encouraging trend, and we think that it continue to grow with trade agreements and with other tools to enhance those ties.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And how would a free trade agreement negotiated with ASEAN how would it eliminate some of the tariff and non-tariff barriers that some Canadian industries in the region are now facing?
I mean, certainly from a market access standpoint, eliminating tariffs on certain Canadian exports, technical and non-tariff barriers as well, just improving access for Canadian firms, ensuring that they have a level playing field is very important. But also, as I referenced before, in the digital trade side, ensuring that there's important provisions around cross-border data flows and ensuring that our digital services firms have the ability to operate in the country, to interact in a way to work, but with both from both their Canadian and regionally based industries. So trade agreements serve, I guess, an important role in that sense, but also we've seen with recent trade agreements something we refer to as the announcement effect. And that's when a new trade agreement comes into force, it can actually generate additional interest and awareness for firms both in Canada and firms in Southeast Asia in doing business with each other based around a free trade agreement. So that's something that we've been able to benefit from with recent agreements like the CPTPP and could benefit from with a Canada-ASEAN or Canada-Indonesia FTA.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. And then in what degree would a negotiation to the treaty with ASEAN contribute to diversifying the Canadian supply chains?
Sorry, was that addressed to me? So yeah, so one of the things that we've witnessed is that, well, for one, there's a lot of movement towards Southeast Asia right now, including in the context and the geopolitical uncertainty that we're facing. There's a lot of interest in operating in Southeast Asia, a lot of global attention towards Southeast Asia. So there's an opportunity for Canada to be plugged into those supply chains as they form. But separately, we believe that the path forward for Canada's diversification agenda, trade diversification agenda, is a champion trade growth, not diversion. And so really to the extent that we can grow our trade, accelerate the trade and growth in parts of the world, Southeast Asia principally, is beneficial for Canada, and trade agreements once again can assist in that process. It's not the only trade agreements are a bridge. They don't it's up to businesses to cross that bridge, as our former trade minister used to say, but it's an important bridge to have for businesses.
Reaching 5:30, does any of the committee have any outstanding question that they just must ask? Everybody's good? All right. Thank you all very much. Thank you so much for the witnesses. Apologies for the time that we lost. All right. Thank you all very much. Meeting adjourned.